Oh, hello. My name is Hyker, and welcome to Land of Id, the museum where we show the evolution of ideas. Around me we have 71 collections going back over 150 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. They come through many categories, and in the collection there are 2 Guinness World Records. Well, this is the entrance to the Land of Id Museum as it now stands. And our plan for this was we were going to have here a display of Morse code, which was the beginning of the use of electricity in the world and communication. And then that became telephones. And over here we have the history of telephones, antique telephones. We got the old wooden hand crank telephone that would have been on a farm in the Midwest, all the way up through here to cell phones and all the different kinds, the old brick phones and different kinds of things like that. And on this side, we were installing the history of early radio and television, and we've got props from television like Howdy Doody and Lassie and Bill Cosby and Lamb Chops, and some old TVs up here and stuff. And then we go into the museum itself. As you come in the door of the museum, you're greeted by the Corpse Bride. This is the only life-size model of the Corpse Bride that I know that was ever made, and it was made so that Tim Burton could see what she looked like. But the movie itself was made with 12-inch puppets in animation. Over here we have a tiger skull that was carried by Westmaler in the movie Tarzan the Ape Man in 1932 that was filmed here in Florida. And then over here we have the story of my 2 favorite filmmakers. The first of my 2 favorite filmmakers is Walt Disney. And here's a picture of Walt Disney taken in a room called the Sweatbox in California, where he had the machine so he could add the sound to his cartoons, because the cartoons didn't really talk. And they had to invent a machine to add sound to cartoons, because before Disney, they were all silent with just a piano playing. So they invented this machine here called the Moviola. The Moviola machine was made so he could add sound to the cartoons. While Walt Disney's favorite camera that he used in his animation was the Mitchell Rackover 16. There's one here. And this is equipment that is actually from Walt Disney Productions number 57. He had a lot of these. Here's the Sweatbox Session right here, a sheet from 1942 that has the dialogue that they had to add to the cartoon Blacksmith Donald. And that's original 1942. And then they came out with a production model of this machine, and it looks like this green one right here. It's the Moviola. And then after Walt Disney, on our display, which is our temporary display as we're put into our museum, the next thing we have here is a spotlight. This is the world's largest carbon arc follow spot. The last time this was used was in filming Woodstock, and it's in the movie Woodstock. You can see a crane lifting it up to a tower in the front of the movie. And back in the 1950s and 60s, no one had invented spotlights, bulbs, actual bulbs that were bright enough to be used in projectors or big spotlights like this. So they actually had carbon rods about 1/2 inch in diameter that they put together and made a spark, just like a welder, somebody welding, and they would move them slowly with a motor to keep the spark going. And it made a lot of smoke, and that's why it's got a chimney on the back of it. So this is the world's largest carbon arc follow spot, called the Super Trooper. And this is a carbon arc slide projector, one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. I don't know if anyone's ever made a bigger one. And over here we have a clapper that was on display at the Salvador Dali Museum in February 2008, when they had the story of Salvador Dali and the movies. And within the museum we had all of these plywood cutouts of these old-time movie stars on display amongst the priceless paintings that Salvador Dali did. And it was funny to see everyone posing next to the cardboard cutouts for selfies with Laurel and Hardy and all these famous people here. And it was kind of surreal, ignoring the $50 million paintings. Anyway, over here we have a story, the beginnings of my second famous filmmaker, which is me, of course. And I graduated from film school in Boston, Boston BFVF, Boston Film Video Foundation, in December 1976. And I bought, which at that time was the world's largest VCR, which is the 3/4-inch U-matic you see back there. I made my first television show, bought this tripod here, and I used an Ikegami camera. Not this one, it was a little smaller than this Ikegami camera, which I borrowed from the Drake, Massachusetts lending thing they had at the high school. And then my friend Harvey Champagny and I went out to look at what we could do to make a video. And then we came across, in December 1976, the Canadian snowshoe racing team racing against the New England snowshoe racing teams. And at that time, I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as snowshoe racing. And we made a video of it, and then we sold the video to the Canadian Broadcasting Company. It was shown nationwide in Canada, and that was my very first production. We have some old movie cameras. These are mostly 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter, and over here we have a giant 70 millimeter camera. The film was really big, and it was used by NASA to film the Mercury and Apollo space launches at Cape Canaveral. And over here we have an item that is very, very unusual. This big giant box. This is actually a soundproofing box known as a blimp. And cameras used to make a lot of noise because they were mechanical devices, but you would take a camera and you put it inside of that, and it cut down the noise. In back of it, we have a Mole Richardson perambulator. I've always loved that name. These microphone booms were used in lots and lots of movies and television shows. You can see this one on the set of I Love Lucy series. And this is the actual one that came from Desilu Studios. So this one was probably used by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And over here, you'll see in the museum there are lots of backgrounds in walls. And they're all used in previous movies and expos. This is the side of a steamship from 1900 that was used in a feature film a long time ago. And then someone came along with an idea. I wasn't planning to have any organs in the museum, and then I spontaneously found 4 organ donors. So this organ, as I was told, was from the keyboard player for Andy Warhol's band, the Velvet Underground. And he was going to a nursing home in St. Pete, and I was given the Hammond organ with the Leslie speakers. Over here there's a big organ, a corn organ from a movie theater. This one uses vacuum tubes. And on top of it we have a helmet that was worn by Ice-T in the movie Tank Girl, which is one of my favorite films. I've got lots of props from the movie Tank Girl, and I have thousands of props that are not on display right now in this museum. We have a Yamaha organ over here. Over here we have a reed organ that was donated to me by a mother and daughter from Kentucky. Another one of the collections is based on transportation, and this is the history of transportation badges and driver's licenses. All of these badges were worn by people who are members of unions, most union truckers, and people from like milkmen, postal workers, and all kinds who delivered coal and wood and ice. Over here we have badges from people who drove taxis, and you had to have a taxi cab license. A lot of them are from New York, New Orleans, and from all over the country. In these 2 spots we were going to put badges from people who drove trams, like subways and things like that, and other badges over here for people who drove buses. When we got to the bus, of course, you had to make change, and here's a change machine, and then you wanted to get off the bus or the trolley, you would ring a bell and they would let you off. Here's a machine, a mechanism here that went in the bus that you would drop your coins in to pay for your toll. They don't do that anymore. And a lot of people don't know this, but years and years and years ago, before they had motorized vehicles, they had horse-drawn vehicles. So they had actual badges for people who drove stagecoaches. Now, when somebody drove a stagecoach and they had a mechanical stagecoach, this was an actual license from a mechanical stagecoach from England. Back in the day, you would have a driver's license with a picture on it, just as you do today, but you also had a metal badge. In most states of the United States, up until World War II, they issued these. Then metal became short and they stopped. There were a few states that never issued them at all. And over here you can see that we have badges from Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Georgia, Indiana, Illinois, and many different states that made badges and are represented here. and the drivers would wear them on the hat or on their collar, facing the left, so that if they were stopped by a policeman, they could see the badge. Now, as a promo for the museum, we took 443 of these badges and photographed them and made this poster, which we are selling on eBay and hopefully in the museum store in the future. Stuck in the corner, we have an old Scopatone music video jukebox. It was made in the 1960s, so it actually uses 16mm film. And they took the scenes mostly out of Hollywood feature films where they had song and dance routines. And you would put your money in the jukebox, make a selection like you would a regular record player. There's a 16mm movie projector made by Bell & Howell, and this mechanism, like a robot, took the film, wired it through the projector, and projected it onto the screen by a series of mirrors, and you watched the screen up above, and you heard the sound, and at the end, when your selection was finished, it would rewind it onto the reel and ready for the next selection. This was made by Telesign in Chicago, and this soon got phased out when they came to digital and this became obsolete, but it's an interesting piece of history. If you look in there, you can see they're all 16mm films on those reels. But over here we have a 1930 Chevy we're working on. This is a 6-cylinder overhead valve engine. They made this engine from 1929-30, which was the first model of it, all the way up until the 1980s. It was a very, very popular engine for Chevrolet. And then we've got the new radiator on here, which I had this custom radiator made. This engine is now running, and we're just putting it together, and we have the body outside. And over here we have another 1930 Chevy that's all finished. This is the emblem, what it looks like here. This was a 1.5-ton truck that was in a farm in Lewis, Kansas. I went out there 7 years ago. I picked it up for $300. The farmer put it on my trailer with a forklift because it was such a rusted piece of junk that you couldn't even turn the steering wheel or anything. It was just totally gonzo. Everybody thought I should send it to the scrapyard. I brought it home. 14 months later, I had a running chassis. This was a flatbed truck originally. Everything from here down, everything here is all original. The engine, the transmission, the wheels, everything is original 1930 Chevy. It's not a hot rod. This is running, driving vehicle, which I can take off with right now and start up. But I decided I wanted to have something that looked like a bus. So I made this body myself. So the whole body, I bent all the metal, put it all together, designed it, and it's all round in the back and everything, and it looks just like it would have been made in 1930. Another unusual feature of this car, because I can't stand not putting something funny into it. You see the hood ornament? Trucks never really had hood ornaments at this time in history, but this is actually a titanium hip joint from a person who no longer needs it. Speaking of the history of ideas, Larry Harvey, back in the 1960s, being an anti-capitalist hippie kind of person, in San Francisco, took a bunch of 2x4s to the beach and nailed them together in the shape of a stick man and burnt them. And that was the beginning of Burning Man. Burning Man seemed to be a good enough idea that people caught on to it, and it's grown to an event in Nevada now that has over 68,000 people at it. I've been to 3 of those big events, and Burning Man is the most wonderful, enjoyable event you'll ever endure. This is a Burning Man mutant vehicle. At Burning Man, you're only allowed to drive vehicles that go at the speed of people walking. So you don't run over anybody, especially out there in the desert in Nevada. So this here is a mutant vehicle. It seats 8 people, and it drives with joysticks from a pinball machine from an arcade game, and it got push buttons here, and I've got electric steering in the front, and this has got a receiver in here, and this works by remote control, so you can actually don't even have to be sitting in it. You can start the engine and drive it around. And I built this a few years ago for Burning Man, and then I built the second one for Burning Man, which seems to be much more popular than this one, that has 7-foot diameter iron wheels on it, and it's outside in the yard, and it's going to go to Burning Man regional event on Virginia Key. Sometimes people have ideas that are not that good. Most of the time people have an idea and other people have a better idea, and it moves on and on throughout history as things constantly are improved. But this case, this was an idea that soon died. In 1966, the Scott's Paper Towel Company put a coupon with their paper towels and toilet papers, and for $1.25 you could receive a paper disposable dress. So from 1966 to 1969, this was a thing, and they actually sold hundreds of thousands of these. And even the Hallmark Card Company got into the into the swing of things. And these are paper disposable dresses that were made by Hallmark Cards that are still in the original wrapper from 1968. And these are paper dresses. Here's a paper dress that actually looks like the Yellow Pages. The most famous paper dress was actually made by Andy Warhol and had Campbell's soup cans depicted on it, as you see here in the sign. And over here we have a truck that was made in 1946 by the White Trucking Company. Joseph White made sewing machines. Then he decided to make cars and trucks starting in 1900, and he made this truck in 1946. Between 1946 and 1967 or 68, it was one of the most popular trucks in America, and then the company was sold to Volvo. This truck is called a cab over because on the other side is a hydraulic mechanism that lifts up the cab. And I'll show you right here on the model. This truck, when I bought it, was actually red and had a tanker on the back and delivered home heating oil to my parents' house in Lowell, Massachusetts. And it used to say Labonte Oil, Tewksbury, Massachusetts on the door. And the cab actually lifts up like this so you can service the motor. One of my little sillinesses is when I display at car shows, I made this flower bouquet, which actually has the bodies of this cab in the center of the flowers, which is just silliness that I do. This truck was made in 1946. I got a little sign here that describes this, and my daughter Xanthia and I drove this to Florida in 2003 from New Hampshire. In this area, we have my 2 Guinness World Records, the world's largest movie camera collection and the world's largest movie projector collection. Of course, all the projectors don't fit in here, and some of the cameras are too big also. But there's 1,600 cameras in the collection. They're all different from each other, and they're all cataloged. In this area, I made a tribute to 3 specific companies. One was Bolex Corporation. Bolex in Switzerland made cameras that were very popular in film schools all over the world. And if you went to film school between about the early 1940s and 1985, like Spielberg and the like, you studied with a Bolex 16mm camera and you learned how to make movies. And then after that, of course, it went to digital. The other 2 that I've given their own space to is Kodak, because Kodak was a very important player in the history of film and movies and equipment. And then also Keystone of Boston, and over there I have every model of Keystone camera ever made. And on the floor in front of the Keystone display, there's a model train. The Keystone Camera Company actually started by making metal toys, and then they realized that they could make metal projectors out of using the same tools and equipment, and then slowly became more and more sophisticated and made cameras all the way up to including Super 8 with sound and everything as the years went by. And then over here we have the Bolex 16 cameras. These are the ones that were used in all the film schools. And also, as another thing for the museum gift shop, we have this poster, which is actually pictures of these exact cameras that we have printed on the poster. And these are all various models of Bolex cameras and other Bolex equipment, such as this strange Bolex tripod, which is I've never seen anything made like that, but that's the artist in Switzerland are doing that. We have motorized Bolex cameras over here, and then we have a machine over here for adding titles to your Bolex movies. And then of course we have a Bolex camera up here on the wall that's got a gun mount, which of course you couldn't use today because you'd get yourself into trouble. And over here I have a little tribute to the Eastman Kodak Company. This was their original logo that they used for years, Eastman Kodak Company. And then in 1935 they came up with the logo that everyone knows until today. They're still using. In the mid to late 1890s, Kodak came up with some 35mm film, which was used to make all of the early movies and things that they did. And the film didn't have very much resolution. But by 1923, the film stock had improved so much that they decided that they could cut the film into narrower strips and still have a beautiful scene in them. So they came out in 1923 with 16mm. And here is a 16mm movie projector right here. And it has a built-in screen that folds out. And this is called the library model. And this is this only other type of library model. It says right here, Eastman Kodak library model. And These were used in libraries, and they took 35 millimeter movies and transferred them to 16 millimeter film and then offered them in libraries across the country, which brought about, of course, demand for 16 millimeter film, which is what they anticipated. So they also came out with, in 1923, the world's first 16 millimeter movie camera, which they called the Model A. What a creative name. Anyway, that's the Kodak Model A 16 millimeter camera. And then over the years, they came up with other models of 16 millimeter and different types of 16 millimeters. There's down there, there's some 16 millimeter projectors. Then they had 8 millimeter. Of course, they had the Super 8 and the Super 8 sound until finally everything went to digital. An unusual thing that I have here that I thought was kind of fun is I had all the different M series of the Kodaks here. See the M22, the M16, the M14, the M10, and so forth. But I had one missing right here. And I left space for it because I figured someday maybe I would get it, because after all, that's a very common series. But I didn't have that camera. And about 5 years ago, a person came here to the museum to donate a camera, and it was exactly the camera to fill that exact spot, so I just slid it in there and thanked the person very much. We put these in this showcase starting with the letter A and going down to Z way over there. And as you go through here, you have different models of cameras and different companies. But in here we have Bell and Howell, which was a very significant company to make cameras. And they made this model right here, which was actually sold for $75 each back in the 1930s. And it was called the ladies' camera, and it's all embossed leather panels on the side. And down here we have the Bell and Howell camera that was used in film reels. When you would go to the movie theater and you would see the movies talking about the news and everything, newsreels for television. That was that camera that they used almost exclusively all over the country. And then, of course, like I say, there's lots of other cameras here, other different brands. Canon, which now, you know, makes copying machines and everything. They made all these cameras, and Bauer, and I don't know if they're the same company that makes the roller skates, and Elmo and Franklin. Here's an old camera here. This is also a Kodak. This one's a little beat up, but it appears to still work. This is your viewfinder right here, and you have the wind-up thing right here, and you just wind up the camera, and you wind it all up like this, and then when you got it all wound up, you push this button here, and you can hear it running, and you hold it and take your pictures. There's a picture of Lily Tomlin right here, sitting at the telephone operator's equipment. And this here is a switchboard from the 1950s. This is similar to the one that Lily Tomlin used in her comedy routine, One Ringy Dingy. Plug these in and you got different things. This one is from the Empress Motel in St. Petersburg, Florida. It was used in the 1950s. And this also represents the different rooms to connect the phones to it. Then over here, we have a Heathkit television. Now, Heathkit made kits, and you could make your own oscilloscope or voltmeter or whatever, but their most expensive and complicated kit was the color television set. And this whole set of manuals here are just manuals just for assembling this TV. It's amazing. Oh, and here's the remote control. And you could change channels and change the volume. And this television was made by David Powell, who made flight simulators. And he was a famous scientist, and I got the whole story of him. And then when he died, his wife donated it to the museum. But before they had magnetic tape, they had magnetic wire. And over here, this little fine wire, which you could probably just see a shine from right there, is actually a magnetic iron wire. And here there's a recorded program on here of a Bob Hope radio program from 1939. This is a wire recorder and player. This is a wire recorder and player. And we have this issue of 1943 issue of Life magazine, and you open it to this page, and it has the story of magnetic wire recording. In around 1955, BASF in Germany invented magnetic tape, and then magnetic wire was soon history after that. And then over here, we have more televisions. This one here, the time has not been kind to this screen, but there's an old television from the 50s and 60s. Back when televisions used to be really large cases. Over here we have a console stereo, which is, again, the museum is looking for a home, and maybe someone has a large building somewhere that they can move all this stuff too. But this is a console stereo with an AM/FM radio and a record player and everything in it, and it's like brand new. We've got it here. Over here we have a display of gambling devices. These are called punch boards, and you had a metal tool which you punch out a little piece of paper that comes out the back, and then you could unfold it and you could win a prize, and it would tell you a little story or a poem. You paid some money, like you could pay a nickel and you could probably win a box of chocolates or a penny for cigarettes. You could win a radio, and this one over here you could actually win clothes to put on the naked lady. These devices were made from about 1880 till the 1950s, where they were outlawed as illegal gambling devices. People started making electrical and electronic things. The quacks came into it. So they started making quack doctor medical apparatus. So this is a piece of quack doctor medical apparatus called a Neurovolt Ultra Roxford. And I don't know what it was supposed to do, but it made sparks with this tool here. It had high voltage in it, and you put these other instruments in it, whatever. This is a tool here made for curing hard of hearing. This one's for blood pressure. And these are all quack doctor medical apparatus that people would be fooling other people with. And then some of this stuff goes on to all kinds of old, like this is just an amp meter. This is test equipment of different kinds. All kinds of stuff like that. And then I have some old tube radios over here, and tube radios at the top, and other equipment around. And then over here we have the first recorded sound was done on what we call a toilet paper tube, the Thomas Edison record from 1903, and it looked like that. And here's an Edison player right here, which actually plays, and you wind it up like this, like you would the TV, the movie cameras, and you turn this on, and that was high fidelity in 1903. There's other equipment here. This is a television from 1949 over here. These are Thomas Edison record players. When he found out that making disc cylinders was difficult, he went to discs like Victrola did, and these are disc players. This is a record player here from Belgium that has a multi-band radio in it, and a record player, and also a wire recorder. And the case is actually metal from the 1950s. It's a real beauty. And then over here we have my actual Guinness World Records. So here's one here for the projectors, and here's another one here for the cameras. And I have 2 Guinness World Records. I never actually intended to get a Guinness World Record, but back in 2010, a friend of mine, as we were both on the board of directors of the Florida Motion Picture and Television Association at the time, came to a meeting and brought a cutout from an article that was in the St. Petersburg Times, and told me this guy in Greece, Athens, Greece, just got the Guinness World Record for having the world's largest movie camera collection, and he had 500 of them. And this friend of mine, Y-Track, he told me that he says, you have more than 500. I says, no, you'd have to be nuts to have more than 500. And I said, I'm not that crazy. So then I, of course, came home and I started counting. And when I got to 500, I realized that I was actually nuts. And that's when I got the Guinness World Record. And this record was for 894. It has now since grown to 1,600 different cameras. And these are the original text messaging machines. Some people call them typewriters. So there's all different types of typewriters. And there's one over there that they use in the courts. But I actually went to typing class when I was in high school, so that I would be the only guy in a room full of girls. Not that that helped me much. This one over here is called an accounting typewriter, and it was for doing spreadsheets. And if you look at the size of the carriage on that, it's about 2.5 feet long. In 1947, they had no idea what televisions were going to look like, so somebody had the idea of putting a television in a case, aiming it straight up, so you actually sat in your chair and you watched it on the mirror. Obviously, that wasn't one of those ideas that didn't work very good, and nobody else ever did it again. So over here, we have a showcase full of stereoscopes. And this is a stereoscopes, and what you did is you took a stereoscope, and you took a card, and you put that in here like this, if you can do it. And then you would slide this back and forth to get your focus right, and then you could view it in 3D. And these things from 1838 till the 1930s were in libraries all over the world. And when I was a kid in Lowell, Massachusetts, in the 1950s, they still had these in the library in Lowell, Massachusetts. And you could go in and look at view cards. And this is how people who, you know, in the day they couldn't afford to travel. So they had all these cards that showed photographs of things around the world and all kinds of different things that you could look at. And you could tour the world with your stereo viewer. I have a salesman's case from 1903 that was actually carried around to stores to sell these to stores to resell them, and this still has 9 brand new stereo viewers from 1903 are still in it. Back when they first started making cameras, the first people decided that people had 2 eyes, so cameras should have 2 eyes. So all the first cameras were what we call today 3D or stereographic, and this is a stereo slide made around 1880. It's in 3D on black and white because that's what they had back then, and this is a 3D viewer for those, and you can look through this and the picture is absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, it won't work in the camera here. These are 3D cameras over here, and every camera has 2 sets of eyes in it to take 3D photos, and these are 3D viewers from around the world. And these are all 3D viewers from America, which is the Viewmaster, which all of us had when we grew up. Every year there is in America a 3D photography convention, and people go there and do their presentations. My presentation is usually on the art of Burning Man and mutant vehicles in 3D. But as a person I see there all the time who's an avid 3D photographer and has pictures of his band on those old-fashioned stereo cards, and his name is Brian May, co-founder of the band Queen, and he's an avid 3D photographer and actually wrote a book on the history of a certain type of 3D stereo card made in Paris in the mid-1990s. In 1909, General Electric had the idea of making an electric toaster. The first electric toaster in the world is this one model right here, which is porcelain base. The electricity went in there, 110 volts on the end, and it would light up and heat up the toast. And you had to take the toast out, cooked on one side at a time, and you had to turn it around and put it back in. People were complaining about that burning their fingers, so they made the new model. See, they made the side lower. They made it a little more of a V to hold the toast in place. So this is a new improved model. So it was an idea. There's an improvement on that idea. For fancy people, they came up with the all porcelain toasters. And these here is one of these on eBay right now for $3,000. So they're quite collector's items, these models here. When I built this display rack, I tried to make it look like a giant toaster so you could put the toast in from the top, you know, because that's the way I do things. Different people had different ideas of how they should make a toaster. So this company here made a toaster. You put the toast in here, and a little conveyor moves it slowly through the toaster, and it fell out into a plate on the other side when it was cooked. You had to put the toast in here and close this, and when one side was cooked, you had to turn the toast around by hand and put it in again. The Brits like to put their toast, to keep them in a toast rack for some reason. Americans don't really understand that. And these are all toast racks in here. And they would also let their toast get cold, and then they would put it in their tea or in their ale. Somebody had the idea of making a toast and coffee in the same item. This one here, instead of popping up, it pops down. And if you had a large family and you were sick and tired of turning your toast around, here's a toaster that turns 4 toasts at the same time. And these are all different ideas that people had. Here's a toaster that looks like a jewelry box. See, this one here popped sideways, but now everything pops up. And then we have more toasters on this side. This one here had this thing that you could pop out, and you could actually put like a toast in there or even a sandwich and pop it in there and heat up your sandwich. And these are all different ideas that people had for toasters. And here is a modern toaster that when you pop it up, it says Star Wars on one slice of bread and has a face of Darth Vader on the other slice of bread. One of the first items that was ever made that ran on electricity was the electric iron that was sold to the public. And this is an electric iron here from about 1870s. And the electricity went in here. I've got the cords off of them because they just make a mess, but I have the cords too. And this is an electric iron. And then they made the electric iron in many different configurations over the years. They made light bulbs. Thomas Edison made light bulbs. And this is a 1904 Thomas Edison lamp right here. But they made more than 70% heat and only 30% light because they have heating elements in them that were basically like the filaments in the toaster. So I have all kinds of space heaters here. To me, all of this stuff shows the evolution of ideas, the evolution of design, and also they all look like little works of art that somebody put a lot of effort into designing these things. The first item that I've ever seen that plugs in and runs with a motor is this device right here. And it says right here, 1902, and the first electronic item I've ever seen is a Hamilton Beach vibrator. And then over here we have other early appliances, waffle makers, popcorn maker, drink maker, our early vacuum cleaners. And then we had some extra toasters we didn't know what to do with, so we put them up there. So over here we have toaster ovens. As you could click on your plate, you have placed a griddle here, and you have all toaster ovens, and you could bake a loaf of bread in here. And these are old fans, so this was electricity. But if you didn't have electricity, then you would do something like this. I don't know why the housewife would complain about her work being so difficult. Here is a vacuum cleaner. All you had to do is pull this open, and it would suck the dirt off the floor. And you close this, and you keep moving it like this, and you could vacuum your house. And if you didn't have electricity and you still wanted to iron your clothes, you could have an iron like this, and you could fill it with hot coals from the fireplace or the stove. This one runs on gas, and this one here actually ran on gasoline or kerosene, and here's a measuring cup that comes with it. You put the fuel in here, and then you light a fire in here, and you could actually iron your clothes with a fire inside of this thing. And so forth, and that's what they did. And then, of course, if you didn't have electricity, you had to have an ice box. So here's an ice box. This is an old Gibson from well over 100 years ago. And you would have a card like this, and you put it like this in your window. The iceman would see it and bring you 50 pounds of ice. If you put it like this, he would bring you 25 pounds of ice. So this is how you told the iceman you wanted ice. If you put the card in backwards, he knows you didn't need any ice that day. And he would just drive down the street. And then he would bring, with his tongs, he would bring the ice in and put it in here, and as it melted, you had to empty out a tray down here, and this is how you kept your food close. In the museum archive, we have many thousands of items that are not on display in whole other categories, especially relating to the history of film and television, with lots of props and costumes and everything, but there's no space in this building. That's why we hope to find a larger building and someone who wants the museum in another location. So I thank you very much for listening to me and viewing all of my artifacts and things that I've collected over the years.